necessary Christianity. I've been saying it over and over and over again. I'm hoping it's sticking. There's a rule. Church is not advertising, don't get me wrong, but there's a rule in advertising that say that advertisers know that you're getting their message when you're sick of hearing their message. And so anyone sick of everyone remembers the Energizer Bunny, right? Even, no, I'm the only one again. Man, this is rigged. Okay, we got a couple folks. Whew. Thought I was going crazy. I got so sick of those bunny commercials, but it means it's sticking, it's working. And so I want to say this again. Christianity is necessary for the world. It's necessary. The world needs us to be the church that God calls us and wants us to be the Christians that God calls us and wants us to be. And because the world needs that, there are some things that we need to do as well, things that we must do. And if you were paying even a little bit of attention to the scripture reading this morning, you know what today's sermon's about and what today's message is about, that to follow Jesus, we must work the work of love. We must work the work of love. And I phrased it that way, even though it's a little awkward on purpose, because we could say to follow Jesus, we must love. But the reality is loving the way Jesus loved, loving the way God calls us to love is work. There is no doubt about it. Now, that doesn't mean, it's not emotionally based. Some love, there are types of love that are about emotion, and we feel love and we feel this, and that love lasts as long as the emotion lasts. And when the emotion goes away, the love goes away. That's not the kind of love that John was writing about in his letter, that Paul wrote about in his letters, that Jesus talked about and showed us. It wasn't that kind of love. There's another kind of love, a love that's affectionate. It's kind of like the love that a parent has for a child, or a child who's not a teenager has for their parent, a child of any age has for their grandparent. There's affection in that. That's not this kind of love. It's not affection-based. There is romantic love that folks have for each other. All of those others are legitimate kinds of love. There's the love of a friend that a friend has for a friend. None of those are the kind of love that Jesus taught about and showed us, that Paul and John wrote about. The love that they wrote about is a love that's based in the center and core of our being, which is our will. Our will, that place in us that says, this is what I'm deciding to do, and this is what I intend to do, and this is what I'm going to do. No matter what the circumstances, no matter what my feelings, no matter what I may think about it at the time, I have decided that this is what I'm going to do. This is the love Paul was talking about when he said love is patient and love is kind. When he said things like, you can give your body to be burned. You can surrender your body. You can die as a martyr. You can give everything that you possess to the poor. You can speak with the tongues of human beings and of angels. But if you do not love, it amounts to nothing. That love is a love that's based in the will and decision. And that love is work. It's work. It's not that it's bad. It's just that at times it's really, really hard and requires a lot of effort. And that's what we're looking at today. For followers of Jesus, loving is not optional. We have to do it. We don't get to decide not to. And I I've read a lot of verses already. I'm going to go back and hit a couple of those verses and a couple of others that I haven't read already. And just to drive this point home, that for followers of Jesus, loving is not optional. Let's take a look at these. We know that we have come to know him if we keep his commandments. So Jesus is saying, John is saying that we know God, we know Jesus, not if we've studied a lot about him in the Bible, not if we've had a warm, fuzzy experience in church or at camp someplace. We know Jesus if we keep his commandments. Whoever says, I know him, but does not do what he commands is a liar, and the truth is not in that person. But if anyone obeys his word, the love of God is made complete in them. So somehow love has to do with obedience and keeping commands here. Love for God is truly made complete in them. This is how we know we are in him, how we know we are in God, how we know we are in Jesus. Whoever claims to live in him must live as Jesus did. For this is the message you heard from the beginning. We should love one another. We know that we've passed from death to life because we love each other. Anyone who does not love remains in death. Dear friends, let us love one another. I want to sing this part. We used to sing these verses. I don't remember where I learned this song. I learned it when I was a kid. I'm not going to sing it. And for that, there should be a whole chorus of amens. You don't want to hear me sing. Let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God, but whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. Since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. Whoever claims to love God yet hates a brother or sister is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. For followers of Jesus, loving is not optional. This is required. It's the heart of who we are. It's the core, the essence of what it means to be a Christian, to be a follower of Jesus. You know, that word Christian comes from the Greek. I can't tell you the Greek word right off the top of my head. That's all right. But it just means a little Christ. Little Christ. For us to be a little Christs, I'm kind of thinking of ants right now, you know. Little Christs. We got to live like Jesus, and that means loving. That's why Jesus came, right? For God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believed in him, put their faith in him, wouldn't perish, would have everlasting life. John there talking about, he wrote that gospel about Jesus talking about what it means to follow him. You're moving from death to life. And then later John is saying, if you're still hating people, you're still living in death. You are not living in life. You are not living in life. For followers of Jesus, loving is not optional. Now, if you're like me, and I hope you're not on this score, because it's no fun to be me on this part. If you're like me, rules, I'm a rule guy. I like to know what the rules are. I like to have them clearly laid out so that I can follow them and know at the end of the day, I have been a good boy. I have followed the rules. That's why one of the reasons I was successful in school is I loved rules. Tell me to sit still and be quiet. All right, I can sit still and be quiet. Tell me to do my homework. Okay, I can do my homework. Tell me to read. Okay, I can read. Tell me to go outside and play. Okay, I'll do it. I'll follow the rules. I get the pat on the back. I feel very good about myself. Whew, mission complete. And then I read this about loving everyone. And I think, but what about all the other rules in the Bible? So there's lots of rules in the Bible. Lots of rules. I mean, there are 10 commandments. 10 commandments. And then there's a whole host of other rules in the Old Testament. And then there's one way to read the New Testament where it looks like we even get more rules on top of the old rules and the other rules. What about those rules? Because what if my loving conflicts with the rules? And if I'm loving, but I'm not following all the rules, and if I'm following all the rules, but it gets very confusing. So if you're in that spot with me where you're like, I need rules. I got to know I'm following the rules. This whole love thing is nice, but what about the rules? Let's look at this. Loving others fulfills the law. This is crucial. It was for me, because like I say, I'm a rule guy. This freed me from a lot of stress and anxiety and worry. Loving others fulfills the law. Paul said exactly that in his letter to the Galatians. He said, you, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free. Don't use your freedom to indulge your flesh. You know, being free doesn't mean you get it. It's not loosey-goosey. It's not whatever feels good, do it. Whatever I want to do, I get to do it because Jesus died and made me free. Now I can do whatever I want. Paul says, no, that's not it. You're free from the law, for sure. You're not free to do whatever you want. You're freed to do this. Serve one another humbly in love. And get this, the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one commandment: love your neighbor as yourself. So if you're a rule person like I am, and you got all of those rules, and you don't know which one to apply when, and you don't know what to do when, where, and how, if you're ever in doubt, love, and you fulfill the law. Now, I got to think this verse was controversial somewhere along the way, because most English, I'm not sure if it's most, I didn't count all of them, but many English translations don't say fulfill the law. They say the entire law is summarized in this one commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. That's a very different feel, summarized. Summarized is not fulfilling. I know that. If you read a summary of a book and take a test just reading the summary, you soon discover that you have not fulfilled the requirement of reading the book. Right? Summaries are not fulfilling. The word is fulfill. This is the same word when we read throughout the Gospels where the gospel writers say that this had to happen so that the scriptures would be fulfilled. Where it says Jesus did this to fulfill the scripture. Where Jesus said, I didn't come to destroy the law, but to keep it, to fulfill it. It's the same word. It's the same word. This isn't a way of getting around the law. This is the heart of keeping the law that we love. We love our neighbor as ourselves. Now that brings up a different question, another question that we have to ask if we're going to be about this business of working the work of love, which is, who are the objects of love? Who do I have to love? Who do you have to love? Don't worry, I have a list. A list. We'll see how comprehensive it is. The first one, we got to love our family. Over and over, John said, loving your brothers and sisters. Now, he wasn't talking about biological brothers and sisters. We'll get to that in a minute. But Paul makes it very clear in his letter to the Ephesians, when he's talking about living out the life of faith and how do we do that it starts at home. That following Jesus, loving other folks starts at home. It has first of all to do with how husbands love their wives and how wives love their husbands. It has to do with how parents treat their kids and kids respond to their parents. It has to do with these basic core relationships, loving our family. Someone who is in church every Sunday and praising Jesus and singing loudly and quoting the Bible, but goes home and is cruel and mean to their family, is not fulfilling the law and is not living in the light. Loving has to start at home, has to start with the family. It can't stay there, though. Has to include our friends. We're going to put church folks in there. I know, not everyone in church with friends with everyone else, but we can friends, family, we're all there. We're all there. We got to love the folks that are around us. That's what John said when he was talking about brothers and sisters. The specific group there was other followers of Jesus in the church there. Love one another. Love your brothers and sisters. Love the folks in the church. Love your family. Love your friends. That's okay. So far, so good. Nothing radical, nothing amazing. You got to love your family. You got to love your friends. Got to love folks in the church. That's all pretty straightforward. Neighbors. That's the word Paul used. It's the word Jesus used. Love your neighbor as yourself, which begs the question, which Jesus was asked, well, who is my neighbor? That Pharisee was asking Jesus the same question I've posed. Who do I have to love? He was also asking, who do I get away with not loving? There are folks out there I don't want to love. I want to make sure I don't have to love them. I need an out. Surely, Jesus, I don't have to love everybody. And Jesus said, let me tell you let's talk about neighbors. And he told the story of the Good Samaritan. You've probably heard that story if you've been in church for any length of time. The Jewish guy's traveling out in the wilderness, and he gets attacked by bandits, and they beat him, steal all his stuff, leave him lying on the side of the road, half dead. And the pastor walks by, and the pastor says, this looks like a mess. I am not getting anywhere near this mess. And he goes on his way. And the bishop goes by and says, this is a mess. I'm not getting anywhere near this mess. And he goes on his way. And then the Samaritan comes by. And the Samaritan says, this is a mess. I need to step in and help. And he goes down and he dresses and cleans the man's wounds. And he puts the man on his own donkey so the man doesn't have to walk. And he takes him to the city. And he pays for him to stay in an inn. And he provides enough money that the man can stay there for a while and have all of his necessaries taken care of. And then he doesn't wait around for a thank you. He doesn't wait around to get anything back from the guy. He just leaves and goes on about his life. And Jesus said, which one was the neighbor to that guy? And the Pharisee that asked him couldn't even say the word Samaritan because they hated the Samaritans. The Samaritans were cultural enemies, spiritual enemies, national enemies, ethical and moral enemies. They were enemies. And Jesus said, you need to be like the Samaritan. You need to be like the Samaritan, which means we need to love our enemies. In the Sermon on the Mount, he just said it straight out. You've heard, love your friends. I'm telling you, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. And if someone strikes you on one cheek, turn the other also. So I'm not an expert in Venn diagrams. Anyway, I don't know if anyone here is an expert in Venn diagrams, but I think if you do the circle of available people to be objects of love, and you do a circle for family, friends, neighbors, and enemies, that pretty much covers everybody. Everybody. Nobody is left out of Jesus' love. And that shouldn't be a surprise, because we know that God causes the sun to fall, or the sun to shine, and the rain to fall on the good, the bad, and the ugly, the just and the unjust. Jesus died and shed his blood for everyone while we were all still sinners. That gift given and offered to everyone. So shouldn't be a surprise that if we're going to follow Jesus, we are expected to love in the same way. Family, friends, neighbors, and enemies are the objects of our love. That leads us to the work of love. The work of love, well, love is work. And I want to give you a story from the Bible, another story from the Bible. That's not a parable this time, but one of those things that actually happened, and talk about how this work of love works. And that's Paul and Silas in jail. That was a good Bible school song when I was a little kid going to VBS. Paul and Silas were in jail. They sang it. Again, I'm not going to sing it to you. They were in jail. They sang hymns and prayed. Let's get a little more context. Why were Paul and Silas in jail? They went to the city of Philippi. They were sharing the good news of Jesus Christ. People were coming to know Jesus Christ. But there was this one kid following around, a little girl. She was a slave. She was possessed by a demon, and that demon gave her a gift of prophecy so that she had some ability to predict the future, and her owners were using her to make money. She was their little golden goose. And Paul cast the demon out of her. And so those guys that owned her lost their source of income, and they were ticked. And then, as is now, people can tolerate a whole lot of things as long as you leave their bank account alone and their paycheck alone. And once Paul and Silas started costing folks money, then people got ticked off. And those folks stirred up a riot in Philippi against Paul. Paul and Silas and his team, they were out-of-towners, and they were foreigners. So they were Jews in a Gentile area, a Roman area. And so the police came in and they thought, oh, everyone's mad at these guys for causing trouble. They must be the problem. They were arrested. They were beaten. They were flogged. You ever see the Passion of the Christ, the whipping Jesus got? That was the whipping Paul and Silas got. And then they were put in jail. And jail wasn't a nice, clean holding cell. It wasn't even a nice, dirty holding cell. Jail was a cave with dirt or stone floors. And being chained up in the jail in Philippi, we don't know for sure that they did this for everyone, but we do know for sure that they did this for a lot of folks, and maybe for Paul and Silas too. The way they chained them, they sat them on the ground and spread their legs out as far as they would go, and then some, and chained them that way. So they've been beaten to within an inch of their life, raw, open, bleeding wounds, had their legs stretched out in the splits, and chained that way and left in the dark. And they hadn't done anything wrong. Totally unfair. Total abuse of power. And the angel came as Paul was singing, Silas were singing hymns and praying. And the ground shook, and the chains fell off, and the doors popped open. And Paul and Silas stayed in jail. And they not only stayed in jail, they kept everyone else that was there from leaving as well. Why? Because they wanted to prove how spiritual they were? No. Because they wanted to show love to the jailer who had beaten them and put them in those chains. Because they knew that a person guarding the prisoners under the rules of the Roman Empire, if those prisoners escaped, the person guarding them got the punishment that was meant for the prisoners. If Paul and Silas and those others had left, the jailer would have been executed. probably tortured and then executed. The jailer himself knew what was coming when he saw the doors open. He assumed everyone would have escaped, and he said, I'm not going to be tortured. And he got his sword out and was about to take his own life. And Paul said, nope, wait, we're all still here. We're all still here. Paul's love led to that man's salvation and his whole family's salvation. They all got saved because Paul did the work of love. Let's read before we give the end of the sentence here. Let's read a couple more verses. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and our sisters. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? And then this one. This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Folks, the work of love is sacrificial service that addresses real and felt needs. Jesus showed us that sacrifice. His life and his death were a sacrifice. Paul and Silas showed us that sacrifice in addressing real and felt needs. They sacrificed their freedom. They sacrificed their right for revenge, their right to insist on an eye for an eye and a tooth. Paul was a Roman citizen. The jailer broke the law when he did that to Paul and Silas. Paul did not insist that he be punished. Paul sacrificed himself to address the real needs and the felt needs of that man and his whole family. And that's the work of love. Real and felt needs, sacrificially. A friend of mine shows that in a way that might be a little more practical for us. It's been a long time since I was arrested, beaten, and thrown into a jail in the Roman Empire. I don't know about you. It's been a while for me. It was a joke. Sometimes they miss, sometimes they hit. That's all right. My friend Theron is someone who has shown this in an amazing way. Theron is a good friend of mine. He's also been a colleague of mine. He's kind of my hero in a lot of ways too. And he's a lot younger than I am, happens to be African American. And when he was in high school, he was in a high school in a very wealthy neighborhood, and it was predominantly white. Theron was a big guy. He was a strong guy, still is big and strong, and a great football player. And you know how athletes can sometimes get away with things, and athletes got a little nicer ride sometimes than others, and sometimes athletes can be bullies. Theron was not a bully. It was a kid that showed up to school, and he was a small kid. He happened to be a white kid, and he was an outsider, and he was getting bullied, and he was getting picked on, and he was afraid. And Theron put his arm around that kid and made him his friend. Made him his friend. He went and ate lunch with him in the lunchroom. He went to his locker with him between classes. He went to the bathroom with him. He was in the locker room with him. And he made sure everyone in that school knew, if you're going to come after this kid, you're going to have to go through me. Real sacrificial service that addresses real and felt needs. I know kids that didn't have that kind of friend in school and what life was like for them. But when we put ourselves on the line, when we give up our time, our energy, our safety, our security to address the real needs and the felt needs of other people around us, folks that are vulnerable, folks that are hurting, folks that are afraid, that, friends, is the work of love. It's the work of love. Once we've done the work of love, we've got this good news, though, that there is an extraordinary gift in love. And this makes it all. This is I would say it's the icing on the cake, but it's like the pudding between the layers of it. You ever had layer cake when there's custard in the layers like that, and it's not that sort of just the frosting you get at Walmart where I get my frost. Oh, it's so good. This is the pudding in the cake. This is the duck in the turducken, you know. It's the bacon in the BLT. This is the gift. This is why we do all that we do with all of these musts and all of this love. It's right here. I grew up in the church. I grew up in a Christian school. I memorized this verse years and years and years ago. It wasn't until a few months ago that I ever went like, oh, that's what this is about. Look at this. We already read it once. There is no fear in love. Perfect love drives out fear. What's the extraordinary gift of love? Love dispels fear. Now let's think about that. In practical terms, love dispels fear. Do you know anyone who's afraid right now? Maybe they're fearful for their life. Another racism-motivated shooting at a Dollar General store in Florida last Saturday, where some white dude comes in and starts killing people just because of the color of their skin. I think he killed 3 folks before the police showed up and he shot himself. And I've not been in that situation where I have to wonder, am I safe here because of the color of my skin? I know folks that have. And then it is silly even to ask this question, but have you heard the song Rich Men North of Richmond? No? Oh, you might be one of 3 people in the world right now. It's all right. You can hear it, but it's all over the place. You know, this dude, Oliver Anthony, it's his stage name. I cannot remember his real name, from rural Virginia. Went from being someone nobody ever heard of to having the #1 song in the country in a week. Rich Men North of Richmond. I went on Spotify, I listened to, he's got 2 other songs that I think are amazing. One's called, I wrote them down, I Gotta Get Sober, and the other one's I Want to Go Home. And Oliver Anthony is not a professional musician, but he is writing songs about his life, his experience of anxiety and depression and struggles with mental illness and financial insecurity and the insecurities that come from living in the chaotic, destructive world that we live in right now. And he's written some absolutely beautiful songs. And I went on YouTube just to see what other folks were saying about him. And folks from all over, black folks, white folks, you know, as near as I could tell, like some Sikh Indian folks, rich folks, poor folks, well, mostly poor folks and middle-class folks that are saying, this man is singing my truth. This man is singing my song. Because he's singing about all of this fear, all of this anxiety, all of this heartache, so much of it which is so beyond control, human control. You know, 90% of life just happens to us. And when you're in a spot like Oliver Anthony's been in, like so many other folks have been in and are in, where what is happening is hurtful and destructive, and you don't know how to make it stop, and you don't know how to make the darkness go away, and you don't know how to get free, and all you want to do is curl up under a blanket and die. And millions of people saying, this is my life. He's singing about my life. And what Jesus is saying to us is, church, this is why you are here. There are people in this world that are dying of fear and anxiety, and you have in your hearts and in your lives the very thing that dispels fear, love. Go and love folks so much that they're not afraid anymore. Like my friend Theron did for that kid in his school. He loved that kid so much that that kid was no longer afraid to come to school. Who are the folks that you know that are afraid? Who are the folks that you know that need someone to love them so much so they can stop being afraid? And if you know someone that's like that and you're like, they need a lot of love, I don't know if I can do it myself, then get some other folks from the church. That's why we're here, to love. Whatever situation they're in, whatever darkness is overwhelming them, whatever anxiety is crushing them, Jesus says, just go to them and love on them till they stop being afraid. so they don't have to fear anymore. He says, you can handle that. You can do that. Don't worry about breaking the rules. If you're loving them, you've already fulfilled the law. Just love. That's the gift. That's what we have right here in little old Rock Springs United Methodist Church. Is this amazing power. Talk about lifting a moose. When you can lift love, or when you can lift fear from someone's life, the joy and the hope that brings, joy unspeakable, full of glory. This is what we've been called to. This is the gift that we've been given, the power that we've been given. Followers of Jesus must work the work of love. But it's not tiresome, toilsome. It's hard, but it's not dreary work. It's the work of setting people free. Setting folks free. In Jesus' name, amen.